Have you ever wondered what happens to a predator when it loses its teeth? Think about a shark that suddenly can only eat plankton. That's how I feel when I look at Nissan today. I remember perfectly, back in the 90s and early 2000s, that a Nissan was the car you aspired to own. The Maxima was the Japanese BMW. The 350Z was an attainable dream, and even their more modest cars had a spark, something that made them desirable. Today, however, the brand feels generic. Like a safe choice at a car rental agency, but rarely the first on anyone's wish list. The decline hasn't just been a perception, it's been a financial bloodbath. Between 2017 and 2022, their global sales plummeted by 40%. In 2019, they posted losses of over $6 billion, their first major deficit in more than a decade. Their stock price sank by 70% in that same period. It's a hemorrhage of money, of reputation and of relevance. So, how did a brand that was once synonymous with exciting innovation end up being, well, just another brand in the crowd? The answer isn't a single catastrophic mistake, but rather a slow and painful death by 1,000 cuts. It was a perfect storm of bad marketing decisions, a toxic corporate culture, and an arrogance that kept them from seeing the world was changing. And today, we're going to analyze the 5 deepest cuts that almost bled this Japanese giant to death, revealing lessons that any company, big or small, should engrave in their minds. The first and perhaps deepest cut was the original sin, losing its soul. To understand Nissan's fall, you first have to understand its heyday. In the 1970s, under the name Datsun in the United States, they launched the 240Z. This car was a revelation. It offered the excitement and style of a British sports car, but with Japanese reliability. In other words, it started up in the morning and didn't leave an oil puddle in your garage. It was a resounding success, selling 86,000 units in 1979 alone. Nissan built its reputation on this foundation. Practical cars for everyday use, but with a sporty soul. They were bold, sometimes a bit quirky in their design, but never, ever boring. While Toyota was obsessed with bomb-proof reliability and Honda with engineering perfection, Nissan was the rebellious and fun sibling. At their peak in 1985, they were selling more than 830,000 units a year in the United States alone, competing head-to-head with the other two Japanese giants. But in the 90s, something started to rot. The designs became conservative, bloated, and uninspired. They went from being the rock band everyone wanted to see to being elevator background music. You know it's there, but you couldn't hum the tune if your life depended on it. From a marketing perspective, a brand isn't a logo, it's a promise. Nissan's promise was innovation and excitement. When their cars stopped being exciting, the promise was broken and customers simply stopped believing. But losing their soul was just a symptom of a deeper disease. The real infection began when outside help turned into a hostile takeover disguised as collaboration. By the late 90s, Nissan was on the verge of bankruptcy, drowning in more than $25 billion of debt and with a market share that had been falling for 26 consecutive quarters. They needed a bailout, and it came from France. Renault, the European car manufacturer, saw Nissan's crisis as its golden ticket to enter the Asian market. In 1999, Renault invested $5.4 billion, taking on part of Nissan's debt and acquiring a 36.8% stake in the company in return. On paper, this catapulted them to become the 4th largest car manufacturer in the world. In return, Nissan received a 15% stake in Renault, but with a crucial detail: without voting rights. It was like inviting a friend to crash on your couch because they're broke, and the next day they changed the locks and set their own rules for using the fridge. Grateful, sure, but it's no longer your house. This unequal power structure was a ticking time bomb. At first, the alliance seemed like a miracle. Renault sent an executive named Carlos Ghosn to turn Nissan around, and the guy was a machine. Ghosn, nicknamed Le Cost Killer, did the unthinkable in Japanese corporate culture. He closed 5 factories, laid off 21,000 employees, and cut costs by 20%. And it worked. By the year 2000, Nissan went from losing billions to making a profit of $2.3 billion. The synergies? That concept that's usually just smoke and mirrors in mergers. Here they actually worked. Sharing suppliers and parts saved them billions. But beneath the surface, resentment was growing. Nissan executives felt like second-class citizens in their own company, and this cultural and power tension would lay the groundwork for the catastrophe that was to come. And that unequal power dynamic put on the throne a man who would be both Nissan's savior and its executioner. With Ghosn at the helm and the company back in the black, Nissan became intoxicated with success. And like any addict, they wanted more. This brings us to the third cut, the most self-destructive of all. The cult of growth above all else. In 2011, Gosen and his team launched an incredibly ambitious plan called Power 88. The goal was to raise Nissan's global market share from 8% to 10% within a few years. They wanted to dethrone Toyota and Honda, and the way they decided to do it was a textbook lesson in how to destroy a brand's value. Instead of focusing on building superior cars that people would desire, they decided to flood the market. How? Through fleet sales, they started selling cars at rock-bottom prices to rental companies and large corporations. In 2016 alone, their fleet sales increased by 42%. To move such high volume, they offered massive incentives, paying almost $3,400 per vehicle, nearly double what Honda was offering. The strategy, in terms of volume, worked. By mid-2016, their market share in the United States reached an impressive 9.7%. Thank you. Almost hitting their target. But here's the psychological and financial trap. Chasing vanity metrics is suicide. It's the classic social media trap applied to cars. They were obsessed with having more followers, regardless of whether they were bots. Meanwhile, real engagement, that is, customer loyalty, and most importantly, profits, went down the drain. In a single quarter, while their market share was rising, their profits fell by 9%. They were selling more, but making less money. Even worse, from the consumer's perspective, this strategy completely devalued the brand. Who wants to pay full price for a new Nissan Altima when you see the same model everywhere as a beat-up rental car? The message you're sending to the market is, our cars aren't good enough for people to buy at their real price, so we just give them away. And this growth at all costs strategy not only cheapened the brand, but also created the perfect breeding ground for the next phase, a corporate civil war. When a company focuses on the wrong goals and internal pressure mounts, cracks in the culture turn into chasms. And at Nissan, the chasm swallowed everyone. This brings us to the fourth cut, the Game of Thrones in the boardroom. In 2018, the world was shocked when Carlos Ghosn, the superstar CEO who had saved Nissan, was arrested in Japan on charges of financial misconduct. He was accused of failing to declare part of his income and of embezzling company funds. The story of his later escape from Japan, hidden inside a music equipment box, is movie material, but the real espionage plot was happening inside Nissan itself. It turns out that many of those who reported Ghosn were his own executives. Why? Because years of resentment over Renault's control had reached a boiling point. They feared that Ghosn was planning a full merger that would give Renault total and permanent control. So they orchestrated a coup. At that time, Nissan's boardroom looked less like a business meeting and more like an episode of Game of Thrones, but with fewer dragons and more incriminating spreadsheets. The chaos that followed was absolute. Ghosn's successor was removed shortly after due to his own accusations of financial misconduct. An informant described it as a man-made disaster while the executives were busy stabbing each other in the back. Who was thinking about designing the next great car? Who was planning the strategy for the electric future? The answer is absolutely no one. The paralysis was total. And while the executives played their own game of spies, the automotive world changed completely, and Nissan just stood on the platform, watching the train leave. The price of indecision and internal strife is always the future. And this is the fifth and final cut that left Nissan bleeding in the modern era. Ironically, Nissan was a pioneer. In 2010, they launched the Nissan Leaf, one of the first mass-produced electric vehicles in the world. They had almost a decade's advantage over many of their competitors. They were positioned to dominate the electric future. But what did they do with that advantage? Absolutely nothing. While Tesla became a trillion-dollar giant and other brands invested billions in electrification, Nissan let the Leaf wither away, with minimal updates and technology that quickly became obsolete. Nissan had the winning ticket in the electric car lottery in their hands, but instead of cashing it in, they used it as a coaster while they watched Tesla build a casino with their winnings. They were so distracted by their internal conflicts and their obsession with combustion car sales volume that they completely forgot to invest in what was coming next. By the time they realized their mistake, it was already too late. Now they have a plan to launch 27 new electrified models by 2030, but it's just a game of catch-up in an already saturated market. Not only did they miss the boat on electric vehicles, but they also ignored the resurgence of hybrids. Toyota, on the other hand, has been massively capitalizing on this. Their showroom in recent years looked like a time capsule from 2018. Outdated designs, hard plastics, and a total lack of the innovation that once defined them. So here we are, with a brand that was once a global icon, now struggling for relevance as a second-tier competitor. Nissan's story is a corporate tragedy in 5 acts. It lost its identity, entered into a toxic alliance. It became obsessed with the wrong metrics, self-destructed due to internal power struggles, and as a result, was left blind to the future. They're trying to turn things around with new leaders and new plans, but rebuilding consumer trust and a reputation for innovation takes decades, and in the automotive industry, time is a luxury you don't have. The question now is whether the DNA of that Datsun 240Z still runs through these companies' veins. Can they be bold and exciting again? And above all, relevant? And which iconic Nissan car do you remember most fondly? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're fascinated by how a single decision can cost $1 billion, you have to watch my video about the $1 billion advertising blunder that destroyed Jaguar. It's proof that in the automotive world, a bad ad can be just as deadly as a faulty engine. I'll leave it for you right here.